Jewish women saved from a Nazi camp, including your mother.
Including my mom.
Wow.
That's true.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't intend to write a book. My mother passed away. She was, already getting on. She wasn't a kid when I was born because it was after the war, obviously. She was about 39 when I was born, and when she passed away, I decided, I'd always wondered how she'd managed to survive. I mean, I knew she'd survived, and I knew she'd been in a couple of death camps, actually. 2 death camps and one concentration camp. Besides that, she'd been in Berlin during the height of the Allied bombing raids, being forced to work in a factory. She'd escaped the bombs and run from them, and then she'd been in line in Auschwitz to the gas chamber, quite literally, and then pulled out. And so I never, all of this was a mystery to me, and was a mystery to her as to why this had happened. In other words, what had caused her being saved at all these particular points in time. And I tried to look it up when she was alive, but the research sort of didn't exist. And then a few years later, I happened to be visiting her oldest friend in Israel, and I came across one short book, a document about it, and well, this is interesting. That gave me a lead, and for years I just sort of followed the thread and learned all this stuff. And after a while, I said, well, I'm going to write a short article about this. And I wrote a short article, and then this Holocaust scholar who read the article said, you have to turn this into a book. And a couple of years later, I found myself with some time, and I decided to, nothing. It didn't take me a year to turn this into a book. 8 years later, it came out.
Right.
It took forever to research it and get all the details, and also incorporate it into a way that it didn't sound, I mean, it's not a depressing book. It's a story about these incredibly strong women, both emotionally and physically, who survived the worst that the world could throw at them. And then how they were so bizarrely saved by just one little guy who had nothing to do with politics or war or anything, who sort of realized there was a moment here and he could save them. I mean, I don't know. It literally, Himmler, who, people talk about the Gestapo, you hear those names being thrown around, the SS. Himmler was the head of both the Gestapo and the SS. He was the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany behind Hitler. But as 75 years ago, as things were not going well, he was a man who was very interested in surviving in a post-war world. And he sent a representative, amongst others, he sent a representative to Stockholm. And this underling of, Himmler, of course, being, thinking the way Nazis did at the time and the way Nazis still do today, was of the conviction, the absolute belief that the Jews, this one monolithic organization in the world called the Jews, ran the world. And if he wanted to try to set a peace for himself after the war and save his life, well, if Churchill wouldn't talk to you, well, talk to a Jew. So he literally, he's got a plane on the tarmac in Stockholm, ready to leave for Berlin. And 2 hours before the plane takes off, this Jewish businessman gets asked if he'd like to come to Berlin and meet with Heinrich Himmler. Guy wasn't a lawyer, a soldier. He was literally a furrier. He had a small business. I mean, furriers maybe don't exist too much today, but back in Stockholm in 1944, they were pretty common. Sure. And instead of saying, "Are you crazy? You're asking me to go to the capital of a country where being a Jew is a capital offense?" Yeah. Instead, he goes, "Yeah, okay." So they got on this plane, they fly, and they arrive at the Berlin airport. And eyewitness accounts are, he gets off the plane, and the first thing that happens is 6 fully dressed SS men in full regalia greet him with a "Sieg Heil!" To which eyewitness accounts are he responded by doffing his cap and responding, "Good evening."
Wow.
And he puts his hat back on, and he has to wait and wait and wait. And Goebbels, the head propagandist for the Nazis, is broadcasting live, about the Jews in the airport. And he's the only Jew in the Berlin airport. And he's sitting there, and finally he gets taken off on this harrowing drive with bombs, to finally meet with Himmler. And Himmler basically says, in effect, I'm interested in working out a ceasefire on the Western Front. Would you be able to help us in this? And instead of going, look, you want to buy your wife a nice pair of mink-lined gloves for the winter, that's what I do. But Churchill, Eisenhower, Western Front, what are you talking about? Instead of that, he goes in what is obviously not merely a bluff, but the bluff perhaps of the century, if not the millennium. He goes, yeah, sure, no problem. But you got to do a little something for me first. And he sets out these conditions. He wants the death camps preserved. He doesn't want Jews killed anymore. He wants the death marches stopped. And Himmler agrees. Now, whether he did it or not is another question. But this guy is not stupid. He says, look, I want something right now. On the way down here from Berlin, we actually passed a camp called Ravensbrück. There are Jewish women in that camp being killed today. I want a bunch of them released, and I want them released now. And Himmler goes, oh, okay. He orders the release. My mother's one of them.
Wow.
And that's not where the story ends, because it's a harrowing journey to get out of Germany. And I suppose the kicker of the story, which I'm not going to reveal, is this one act did not turn out to go well for Himmler, nor did it turn out in some strange connection, which is actually direct, did it go well for Adolf Hitler after Himmler does this. It has some very strange consequences, and that's why I decided, I had to write the book.
Wow.
It's so fascinating. You mentioned consequences, and we know that these mass atrocities still affect the generations.
Absolutely. There's no question. They affect the generations that are directly descended from them. They affect the populations in which those generations live. I mean, there's no way for me, there's no way for me to outlive, World War II. And, and generations afterwards have trouble outliving it. These mass atrocities, I don't care where they're taking place in the world, in Rwanda, in Cambodia, in Guatemala.
In the genocide through cereal. If we know better that things like that kill us, then it is somewhat of a genocide also,
well,
right?
I wouldn't exactly say that my stomach qualifies as being genocided, but
it goes on in all different realms for sure.
Genocide eras, but it's true that there are terrible mass things that happen in all sorts of societies, but the evil that people are capable of doing. I mean, the one thing I learned from researching the book for all these years was that this is bred into us. This is genetic. This is in our DNA.
Totally.
This is not going to be removed from us unless there's some sort of science for a millennium, many millennium. It could take epoch. But but if you're offended by this kind of atrocity, you can't give up.
Totally.
And we just have to realize that each of us are capable of good or evil, and we have a choice. There's the famous Persian poet, Omar Khayyam. He said, I sent my soul through the invisible, some word of the afterlife to spell, and by my soul returned to me and answered, I myself am heaven and hell. So we have a choice in life.
For sure.
Beautifully said. Wow. Really inspiring. Love the book, the story.
Why do you feel that Hitler finally took his life? What do you think was the straw?
Actually, that's something I talk about at the end of the book. I think it was pure. I think in many ways it was just the abandonment of his trusted advisors and the fact that the Russians were coming very close. I mean, there was a point in which he could have escaped. He could have gone to the south. People don't realize, unless they know a lot of World War II history, that there was a German army still intact in the south of Germany. He could have gone on for a while. Some of it, I think, was showmanship. I think the tragedy of World War II is it was basically this failed artist trying to make a statement, and even his death, he planned on dying in an almost swan-like leading lady style on the steps of the Reichstag.
For sure.
And it was, it's a tragedy how the world can be led by such crazy people when they're very good at manipulating crowds. And Hitler was very good at it, an early master of the art. And we have to be wary of such things. We must be vigilant at the beginning of such things, that we don't let them go too far, because we are, as a species, capable of taking this to the worst of all possible extremes.
Thank you for shedding light on this. Please tell everyone where they can find and follow you.
It's on Amazon. The publisher's got it on Amazon. The publisher sold the audio rights to recorded books, and I had to contact Recorded Books to let me. I had to audition to do the reading.
To do your book.
There's an unabridged recording of it also on Amazon. And yeah, you can look up my website at my law school, LLS, Loyola Law School.edu, Stan Goldman. I've got clips from all 25 published reviews on it, all of which I've got to say have been extremely kind. So far to the book. So yeah, and there's a video of my mother. I did a half-hour interview with my mother, somewhat just before she passed away, finally talking about it.
Wow, thank you so much.
I'm very grateful for you. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more Good Morning LaLa.